Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. We're on Saga 960. We've had a couple of shows on going back to school with COVID-19, and so I thought I'd reach out to Matthew Gagne, who is the president of the Carlton Academic Students Association, an organization established by Carleton University. It's been operational since 1962. Matthew, how are you? Welcome to my show.
I'm doing great, Brian. Thanks for the invite.
So before we get into the issues, tell me a little bit about yourself. So you're the president of the academic students organization?
Absolutely, yeah. So I'm in my fourth year at Carleton, studying in political science with a concentration in international relations. I'm originally from Moncton, New Brunswick, so I decided to make the trek out to Ottawa because where else to study political science but the nation's capital?
Right.
So it's been going really well. Started getting involved with the academic student government last year as their vice president of operations. So I was in charge of our budget and whatnot, got that passed. And that was really important last year because of the student choice initiative I'm sure you heard about, where students could pick and choose what fees they wanted to pay. So many associations on campus took a budget hit. So I was interested to be a part of the process to adjust to that new reality. But obviously since then, Ontario court has repealed that. And, now we're in 2020, a very different reality where the academic student government has never been more important, in my opinion, on campus because we're in such an unprecedented year when it comes to students learning. We've been doing a lot over the last 6 months since our term started in May to make sure students are as prepared as possible for this new normal.
So tell me, what about the new normal? Are you in Moncton? Are you in Ottawa? Are you going to classes? Or are you doing everything online?
So I am in Ottawa. For now, I'm not even sure when I'll be able to go visit home because I am working here. And also the fact that they're in the Maritimes is a rather longer quarantine phase after you do go visit. So it's made it harder for me to be able to see when I'm able to go home. But I am, and all my classes are online. I'm taking a full course load online as well with that. And there's definitely been an adjustment. Finding the willpower to sit down and watch a pre-recorded lecture, whereas before, you had your time 2:30 to 5:30 in a certain auditorium, you'd be on campus already. So you're seeing, we're seeing students are, it's taking some time to acclimate to it. And that's why really the academic student government's work has been that important because we're working with the university hand in hand because no one's really written the book on how to do a completely online semester with everyone not being able to go to campus. And it's really trial and error. And I've been happy with the work that we've been able to accomplish with the university. And they've been very open to our comments from students and whatnot.
How do you think people are adjusting so far?
I would say overall, students are overwhelmed in a lot of ways this semester. And I think a lot of that from Carleton's, from what I've been seeing from Carleton anyway, is, in the innocent approach of trying to have students engaged throughout the entire semester and keeping them engaged, not just for a few assignments over the course of 4 months. A lot of professors went with the weekly assignment approach and a lot more weekly readings. But when you have 4 or 5 professors adding that much workload to your schedule every week, right, whereas before we were used to, the occasional assignment once a month, depending on the program, the workload's up or down. But I'm seeing that students just aren't used to this much having to be due every week.
So you think the workload has actually gone up and it's because they want to keep you engaged and ensure that you're actually doing the work?
Exactly. And I can definitely understand why they thought that would be the appropriate way. But like I said, when you have 4 or 5 professors all trying to keep you engaged at the same time, fully every week, and we have everyone's working to be able to, whoever's able to work, with the Ontario closures and whatnot, a lot of students have lost their jobs again as well. So that's another issue adding to the underlying stresses that aren't just academically related, but they do affect, how students are going through this semester. So we've been advocating for, and we've been quite successful with the fact that the university has already confirmed to us that the deans are going to be meeting with their faculty staff to kind of find a new way to approach it where, yes, it's important to keep students engaged, but without overloading them either and adding on to an already stressful time for everyone, right? So we're trying to strike that balance where still getting the same value of education, but also accepting the fact that this is unprecedented times and everyone's having different struggles right now.
So much of the university education is the people that you end up meeting with and contact, and how helpful they are both in your classes, but then long-term in life. Do you think students are missing out on that?
Absolutely. There's nothing, obviously I miss in-person classes, but what I miss the most, and I know many students feel the same way, is just the campus atmosphere. Being able to go to the student union's restaurant there and just, between classes, grab some food, hang out with your friends and just spend your whole day on campus and immerse yourself in the Carlton's culture. And I think, second, third, and fourth years, they've already established a lot of those friend groups and they know what clubs they want to be a part of. But a group that we're trying to, keep engaged with the community, and, Carlton community's done a decent job, but, first year students that are coming from all over the country that haven't had the chance to live on residence, where residence is down to about a third of the population that it normally would. Usually we have about 3,600 students. This year it's like 1,300 or 1,200. One of my friends, his little brother started at Carlton this fall, and he's in a pod that would normally be for 6 students, and he's actually by himself. So it's not an easy transition, especially for those first year students. But I've been actually pretty proud of how clubs and societies on campus, like, if you're certain, every program has a club and society. They've been doing a really good job at advocating to students that, hey, we're still around, we're doing online trivia nights and stuff like that, to kind of make sure that when we do go back to normal, whether that's September 2021, hopefully, or whatever that next academic year looks like, that those students don't feel detached from the Carlton community that's already been established through past years.
We're chatting tonight with Michelle Gagne, who is the president of the Carlton Students Academic Association. We're going to take a break for some messages and come back more with Matthew in just a minute. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour, Saga 960. Going back to school has been a challenge for a lot of different people. And I think that, a lot of us have focused on high schools and elementary schools. But university students, I think, have had it really tough because one of the big benefits of university is the in-class experience and the on-campus experience of getting to know people. I stay in touch with a couple of my high school friends, but I stay in touch with a lot more of my university, both my undergraduate and my master's friends. And those contacts are so critically important, I think, longer term in life from a social standpoint as well as from a business standpoint. And so I worry about these kids, these students that are going back to school. And I've heard so many stories of clubs being canceled. I've got a friend who's a cheerleader, and the cheerleaders haven't been able to practice at all year long. So I think it is a big challenge. Matthew Gagne is the president of the Carlton Students Academic Association. Matthew, I understand that you're doing a petition or something in regards to exams and grading. Tell us about it.
So earlier in October, actually just an engineering student launched that petition. That's what brought it on my radar when I saw it was up to about 2,000 signatures after about a week. And we started discussing, I started looking into the program more and whatnot, and saw there were some issues that at least needed to be addressed. And the biggest thing was that there was just a lot of disclarity. Like the university launched this program without much notice, and also students just had so many questions that weren't being answered. And that's really what made this petition a very heated topic, is because there was so much nuance around, what the program was tracking on your laptop. Was it an external program, or was it something created by Carlton? Was the data being hosted somewhere else off campus? These are all questions that, were piling up very quickly. So actually on Tuesday last week, the student association, myself, the Carleton University Student Association, the Residents Association, we had a student government luncheon with the university admin. So we had, the VP of Student Affairs there, the president of the university, the head of technology and whatnot, were all there. And we discussed this topic for nearly an hour. And after going through that process, through our advocacy, we found out that now only about 6% of Carleton courses are still using this e-proctoring software. Many profs that were using it have since then found new ways, not even new ways, just using take-home exams and whatnot to change how they'll be grading students at the end of the year. And that's really what the bulk of our work has been, because after that meeting, we found out a bit more about the program, and it's not about tracking your inside your home or whatnot. There's ways around it. If a student has a situation at home where they don't feel comfortable having a camera on for a complete 3-hour exam period, I heard about one student that emailed. There's now a hotline, like a forum that students can now use with the university to talk about this program. And if it doesn't work for them, they'll find a solution. So one student had a situation at home that they didn't want to have their TA or prof or a proctor constantly looking at. So what they did is they checked in right before the exam, right after the exam, and somewhere in the middle. And then that allowed it, so they didn't have to have that 3 hours straight of webcam surveillance, but it still made sure that we were upholding academic integrity. The student was still there before, middle, and after. And then obviously every exam goes through the academic integrity process where they scan for questions that, answers that are very much alike to another student's in the class or something that might have been seen online. So there's still a lot of ways to make sure that even if we don't use the proctoring program for the full straight 3 hours, that there's ways to uphold academic integrity. As for the 6% that are still using the e-proctoring, for the most part, those are courses that have to be accredited, which means there's a minimum academic integrity standard that needs to be met for those programs to be held in high regard in the academic world. And those especially fall into our engineering and science faculty courses. After talking with the university, we've set up a few new ways. So what happened was we requested that the university send an email to every student that's a part of a course that's registered to be using this e-proctoring software with a link to frequently asked questions, a link to access that forum, where from that forum, if a student, another concern we brought up was financial issues where, is this going to force a student to buy webcams and whatnot when a lot of students have lost their jobs twice in the last 6 months. We're still trying to put food on the table, live on their own. So we actually got the Carlton to make sure that there's a tech bursary in place for this year. And what that is basically is that a student, if they're in financial need and they need to buy this webcam for e-proctoring, the university will help cover that by going through this bursary application. So it's through things like that we've been able to work with the university to make this a more equitable process for students. And I've been happy with the work so far, but we can't just totally get rid of the program itself, because there are some courses that are going to mandate it so they can remain, the degree that a student's getting can remain at high value. But it's still a high priority for the academic student government to make sure that we're advocating to profs that there are other ways to examine students that are just as effective. I'm part of a faculty public affairs that's been doing take-home exams for years now. And I've found it's been a very effective way of grading students, because the questions that are asked, usually it's about 2 to 3 essay questions. And it's about your analysis of the course material. It's not something you can Google. It's not about memorizing the date of the end of World War II or why the Treaty of Versailles might have caused the Second World War. It's just about the why of the course. Why did we learn this? Why do you think we learned this? And you can only have those answers if you've sat in on the lectures and did the readings. So, and we've seen a lot of profs pivot to those take-home exams. Obviously, we still have 6% more of professors to work on, but we've seen a pretty good result from our advocacy on that.
Well, congratulations. And what the alternative is I guess socially distant type of exams in person, but the university decided not to do that?
Yeah, and there's a few obviously there's enough buildings on campus, we could do socially distanced exams, but it's not worth the risk when we know there's options outside of just e-proctoring that can still grade students properly for what they've retained from their course. And it's just not worth the risk, especially with cases spiking in Ontario. Ottawa Public Health keeps launching on their Twitter, our cases are still rising in the city itself. And especially with students, spread out not only all over the country, but all over the globe. For example, we launched our International Student Relief Bursary back in May. That was an initiative we put forward because we knew international students weren't eligible for government help and whatnot. And we sent one of those checks to India. And it's just with the time zone difference, it would be difficult to have those mandated in-person exams because the person's not going to fly from India. And if there's a mandated time to write an exam, are you going to force that student to write an exam at 2 a.m. just because someone else in Canada has to write it at 2 p.m.? So those are issues we'd have to address if we were going to do in-person socially distanced exams. So I think we've struck a balance where we can keep everything safe, keep it logical, everybody being so spread out right now, and still have a decent academic year in terms of making sure students are retaining the information they need.
So my son did a distance exam for Cardiff University in the UK in Toronto, and he had to go to a place where someone he didn't know effectively proctored it and had to sign a document saying that he was alone and did the work.
Yeah, so that's something we've seen Carlton's been doing for a long time with international students. So it would work, but we're not the only country going through COVID, and asking a student to displace themselves when there could be a country with even higher cases where more things are shut down. It's just going to create a lot of speed bumps along the way that might be a logistical nightmare. So I think sticking with the at-home solutions would be best, for at least for now. But when we go back to normal, we've been doing the external proctoring thing for a very long time now. It's been working for our students that don't come to Canada if they're international, or if they're if they're learning from abroad, even within Canada. It has worked, but we're seeing on a much larger scale now. It's not just a few hundred students; it's a few thousand students that are spread out across the globe right now. So that would it would be a lot tougher in logistics wise to get that done.
So the big issue you've got with this proctoring software is the fact that there's a webcam that is looking at the student for the 3-hour time period that they're doing the exam. Is that correct?
Not just the webcam, but it was also a lot of unanswered questions about what was being done with the data being taken from our laptops when we're writing these exams, because they are keeping track of files and whatnot. And we got those questions answered on Tuesday. And it was reassuring to know that I'm not sure if you saw that Western University had a breach of security a couple weeks ago. So I mentioned that, and they drew out the drastic differences between the two systems that Western and Carlton are using. Western was an external software that was brought by they bought it from an external company, and the data was being stored off campus. But with us at Carlton, it's actually been a homegrown product. Obviously, we hired people on to get it to make it and stuff. But where the data is being stored, it's actually in a locked room, and only one staff member in the entire university has a key to get in, and that's the head of technology. So it's a lot different than what we've seen in other universities, and that was reassuring. And we've also been. But
tell me, what's the issue with the files? Like, if you're doing an exam for 3 hours, the only file you should be working on is the exam. You shouldn't be accessing any other files. So what is this? If all of a sudden some, inappropriate email pops up, or what's the concern?
It's about any sort of activity. So if you have notifications running in the background, like for me right now, I'm getting Facebook Messenger notifications because my Facebook's hooked up to my laptop as we're talking right now.
Can't you turn those off before an exam?
Exactly, but because my Facebook is still logged in, it's still there running in the background. And so there could be something being stored there. And we just wanted those questions.
But isn't that appropriate? Because then you could have a buddy helping you with the exam, sending you the answers via Facebook Messenger.
No, absolutely. But the thing is, it's not about they know if Facebook was open, but even when the only thing I have open on my laptop right now is Google Chrome and Zoom. And there's still Facebook Messenger notifications coming in. Because that's just how it works. If you're logged in, you're going to get the notifications.
Okay, but you can turn notifications off.
You can obviously log out of every application that you're in, but nowadays students are wired in.
So, I've got a lot of sympathy for your situation. That said, I know companies that are doing Zoom meetings, and they want everyone to turn the cameras on because they want to make sure people are working.
It's a different scenario though, because you're being paid to do a job, whereas we're paying the university to do a job, which is educate us. The dynamic is reversed.
Yeah, but we want to give you a mark, and the university wants to give you a mark and wants to make sure that mark is justified because you did the work, not somebody else.
No, absolutely. And this is why we've been advocating not to get rid of the system, but to reduce it as much as possible, because there is an equity issue here. Because there's not, I'm lucky enough to have a situation that I'm okay with having a camera on the whole time, but there could be other students, like I've said before, that weren't comfortable with showing their prof what their living situation was like. And the university has told us they're going to find solutions for those students. And that was the biggest issue. And like I said, Carlton addressed the security concerns. We're not going after them on that anymore. We just wanted those questions answered. And the biggest thing for us now is just, we know there's better ways to get it done. Take-home exams have been getting done for a long time now. And it's just time for us to pivot away. With a new semester, we got to stop trying to create the reality of people sitting in the field house or the gymnasium on campus, lined up in desks with proctors walking up and down. That's not the reality we're in anymore, at least for a year. We've already voted to make the winter semester online. So let's take it in stride. Let's roll it. Let's figure out a way to do this the right way, using the technology we have available to us, but also not creating an even higher stress environment for students that's already starting to get in our heads, with the, like I mentioned before, with the workload and whatnot. And, our jobs always being on the line, depending on the case count that day that the province comes out with, that the country comes out with. So we're just trying to make sure that we strike a balance between upholding academic integrity and, respecting students' privacy, and also acknowledging how stressful this next year is going to be.
We're chatting tonight with Michelle Gagne, who is the president of the Carlton University Student Academic Association. We're going to take a break for some messages and come back more with Matthew. I'm going to ask him a little bit about what are some of the other issues facing students today. Stay with us. Well, welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. Interesting conversation with Michelle Gagne, who is the president of the Carlton Student Academic Association. And I think probably taking exams is a big challenge, and trying to figure out exactly how you're going to take those exams and ensure that you're physically distanced and that you're safe at the same time, that you're honestly doing all the work yourself. Is probably a big issue. And so therefore I think his take-home exams solution and some of the other suggestions that Matthew has made are probably pretty good. Matthew, you're in political science. We got a big day coming up, election in the United States. Given your interest in political science, what do you think about the election campaign that we've seen in the United States over the course of the last couple of months?
It's certainly been an interesting run. I want to say I'm confident that Joe Biden is going to pull ahead tomorrow. I'm going to come out and say it. I would not like to see Donald Trump reelected. But there's always that sense of nervousness, because I had that same feeling the day of the 2016 election. I thought Hillary Clinton was going to win it. And then all of a sudden, Ohio goes for Donald Trump. And then Pennsylvania goes for Donald Trump. And I'm like, oh, God, we're in for an interesting 4 years. So I'm not going to say I'm 100% sure. But what's interesting this year is the demographic polls are very different compared to 2016. When it comes to trust and integrity, Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump were very close in terms of those numbers. Some of them Donald Trump was even leading. Because of, Clinton's history, very establishment candidate and whatnot. But looking into 2020, Joe Biden is a lot more of a trustworthy candidate according to those polls. He's leading by a mile when it comes to the personality traits that people want to see in a president. So that's optimistic. That's good to see. And also looking at some of just going in the battleground states, looking at the Rust Belt, like Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Biden's been consistently leading. Obviously, we could have the same thing as we saw in 2016, the ghost Trump voter that didn't want to say they were voting for Trump, but when they went to the ballot, they checked his name. But also, I think what we're seeing is that the electorate's mind is so much more made up this time around. I believe the last poll I saw, it was 83% of voters had already decided who they were voting for. And now, we're up for the elections tomorrow. But in 2016, that number was a lot higher in terms of undecided voters. And we saw those voters break to Donald Trump.
So you're undoubtedly a student of Canadian politics as well. In the Canadian election last time, the statistic was the vast majority of people made up their mind in the last 2-3 weeks. Why is it that Americans make up their minds so much earlier than what you saw in Canada? Any idea?
Well, I think this time they're so like the two candidates are so polarizingly opposite that
they're both older white men.
No, in terms of maybe their aesthetic, they might be the same. But if you look at their policies now and the parties themselves, the Democrats and the Republicans couldn't be farther apart on almost every policy issue. And now everything that ever tries to get passed, maybe except for infrastructure, is such a hassle to get through Congress. And now, we're seeing we just had the confirmation for Justice Amy Coney Barrett. Every issue now is a bloodbath in American politics. There's nothing that unifies people, maybe other than war. And even now, the Iraq War is a huge issue. This war in Afghanistan.
So you're a political science student. Do you study both American politics and Canadian politics and our different political systems in your studies?
Absolutely, yeah. So it's one of my courses was comparative politics of the global north. So really, that is.
Okay, so let me ask you a question. The United States has a two-party system. There are small parties, but they're really marginally small parties. The Green Party and I guess who was the guy that got a couple of votes in 1980 in Florida? That the Consumer Report guy. But other than that, it's primarily a two-party system versus our multi-party system in Canada. And what some academics think is that when you've got a two-party system, people end up within those parties gravitating to the edges, the radical left or the radical right within that system. But in the Canadian system, when you've got a three-party or four-party system, people end up having to appeal to the middle to be successful because they know they're not a majority. Do you agree? And what do you think of the strengths versus weaknesses of the multi-party system versus the two-party system?
It's
like an exam question.
Of having the multi-party system, I like the diversity of options we have, you're right. It does make people cater to the middle because there are those options in the middle. Where in the U.S., I don't think that middle option. Biden's trying to portray himself as a moderate, but his party is going left, and there's nothing stopping it. He's going to he's already committed really to be a one-term president. If he gets elected, then they'll have an open Democratic nomination in 2024. I have a feeling that if it's not Kamala Harris, who's already considered way more left than Biden, that is going to be a left, more Bernie Sanders-esque candidate. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez won't be old enough yet, but my prediction is by 2032 she'll be the Democratic nominee when she's finally over the age of 35. But you see that in the Republican Party, Donald Trump pushed it so far to the right into isolationism and populism that the middle ground, the Mitt Romneys of the Republican Party feel alienated now. And there's no truly conservative party in the U.S. anymore. It's Trump's party right now, and if Trump loses, they're going to have quite the identity crisis on their hands to figure out what the platform is going to be for 2024, or even the 2022 midterm elections. What is the Republican Party? Whereas in Canada, everyone's got their identity, and the Green, you have the Green Party that's fighting, full-heartedly for climate action. They are trying to reform their platform more so it's more universal to not just climate issues, but overall. You have the NDP that are more labor focused. They support unions. We're seeing that in the Ontario NDP party as well. You move to the Liberals, they're right in the middle, and that's why they've been so successful, is that they get the moderate voters in the GTA suburbs and right in the heart of the GTA. They can balance between young people, older voters. But in the US, it's tough to see a family that the grandparents are the same party as the 21-year-old Gen Z voter. But in Canada, my grandfather's a Liberal, and, I voted Liberal in the last election. I don't identify with a certain party at this moment, but last election I did vote Liberal. You don't see that sort of unity in terms of generational unity in the US as you do in Canada, because there's no middle ground anymore in the US. It's either far left or far right. Or it's at least drifting that way as we speak. So in my dream scenario, I would love to see a U.S. system that has a Democratic Socialist Party, led by Bernie Sanders and his followers. The Democratic Party remains as more of a liberal middle ground, kind of like what the Liberal Party looks like in Canada. Where the Bidens and the Amy Klobuchars can run. Then you'd have the Conservative Party of America. That you'd have the Mitt Romneys of the world and the Liz Cheneys, the classic conservatives, and then you'd have the America First Party, which would be the Trump-esque party, where you'd have people like obviously Donald Trump. Donald Trump Jr. might run for president in 2024, and his loyal followers that you would see maybe a Ted Cruz or something like that. You might see.
But that's that's what we had in Canada when we had the reform of the alliance, as well as the Conservative Party and the Liberals and the NDP, and we had minority governments. And you know what? With four parties running an election and a first by the post electoral system, you don't know who's going to win, and you get some strange things. And strategic voting ends up being one of the biggest issues. Is that really fair when people can win? With a four-party system, we had people in the 20 percentile range that were winning elections.
Absolutely, and I'm no fan of that. And that's where I think, if you want the majority win scenario, yeah, the U.S. system works, because unless the third parties are really strong, usually the winning candidate has 51% or above. But I'm a huge fan of the ranked ballot system. They're already using it in Maine for their statewide elections, so the Senate elections, the governor elections. The only thing that isn't used is for presidential.
Explain to our listeners the ranked ballot system, if you could.
Yeah, perfect. So we actually use it at Carlton too for our student union elections. And what it is basically, if there's four candidates for president, you can rank them from 1 through 4. You don't have to give everyone a ranking. If you just want to pick one, you can pick one. But let's just say, for example, I voted Liberal in the last election. I'm from New Brunswick. My riding is either Liberal or Conservative. That's always how it's been. I enjoyed Jagmeet Singh's policies, let's say, and I wanted to vote for him, but I couldn't, because I knew if I voted for him, it was a vote for the Conservative Party, because that's how it works. That's how strategic voting works. If I wanted to vote NDP in 2019, what I could have done with a ranked ballot system is put the NDP candidate number 1, put the Liberal candidate number 2, because I was fine with the Liberal candidate as well, and then I could rank the Green Party 3rd, the Conservative Party, whatever ranking you want to do after that, and go from there. And what would happen is, let's just say in the first ballot, after all the votes are counted, the Liberal candidate has 29%, the Conservative candidate has 25%, NDP has 18%. And the bottom 3 are the PPC Green. The bottom one, the first one, so let's say the PPC has 2% of the vote, their first place votes would drop off. And whoever those ballots, if they ranked a second place voter, they would get those votes. So for the PPC, we'll say the Conservative Party gets a 2% bump. So now they're up to 27%. But now the Green Party's at the bottom at the end of the second ballot. So now the Green Party's votes probably get split between the Liberals and the NDP. And eventually, once you're working through this process, you'll reach a candidate that goes over the 50% hump. And that's what wins the election. So, and we see that.
Which is the way that we elect leaders in our political parties. And Enemy Paul, who won the Green Party leadership just a little while ago, won on the 8th ballot. And so, she ended up getting over 50% of all the votes, but it took 8 ballots and 7 candidates dropping off before she actually accumulated that much. Premier Ford has just made it impossible, made it illegal, effectively ruled out for cities in Ontario to do exactly what you've said is a smart system. Do you think that's wise?
Honestly, he's entitled to his opinion on the matter, but I don't think the provincial government has jurisdiction over how a municipality wants to run their elections. That's completely, I think there needs to be a separation of power on that one. Those are two different government entities. If the city of Toronto wants to use a ranked ballot system, or the city of Barrie, let them do that. I personally believe it's the better choice, but it's not up to the provincial government to decide that, I don't think. And
regrettably, they do have jurisdiction, and so they have decided. But what you're saying is they shouldn't have jurisdiction.
They shouldn't have jurisdiction.
One of his main reasons is he thought the system should be the same. And it is a little bit interesting that in the United States, and you've probably noticed this as well, all these different states have sort of different ways of balloting, of counting, rules on mail-in votes versus absentee votes versus when they get counted, and then also on how the electoral vote, the electoral college gets chosen. So maybe there is some rationale that says, we need one rule for everybody to make it the same, because it seems like a bunch of cottage cheese in the United States.
It does get overwhelming in the U.S. if you're not actively always, surveying it and studying it and having fun watching it. But at the end of the day, I really do hope that Canada can convert to the ranked ballot system. I think it'll give our third parties a stronger voice. And I wasn't totally disappointed with the minority government. I think after a full term of majority, I think it was nice to see that parties were going to have to work together and find policies that they could unite on. And I believe we saw that happen with the confidence vote that happened a week and a half ago, where the NDP and the Liberals came together on maternity leave, I believe it was, or an important policy to the NDP that's going to be positive for workers in Canada. And because of that policy that they agreed upon, the Liberals won the NDP vote to remain in power, and they got the confidence vote through. And in my home province of New Brunswick, there's been, for the past 4 years the last 3 years before they had an election in September, there was a minority Conservative government, and that again forced them to work side by side. And I think after our province had been through a lot of majority governments that failed to get the job done in various ways, either spending too much money or not making the cuts that need to happen or whatnot, especially with New Brunswick being in a very volatile budgetary place right now. It was nice to see our party leaders having to work together, be civil, and show some sort of unity in the legislature to get anything done. So I think overall it's been good for Canada to have a minority government so far. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, just like any government. But I think overall, so far, we're seeing that it's good when we find a balance and we're not always, biting each other's heads off on certain policies.
Your demographic, students, have the lowest turnout of any other demographic in Canada and frankly in the United States. How come, and what can we do to change it?
Yeah, so this is an issue I've been trying to tackle on campus with Carlton for the last year and a half or so now. When the 2019 election came around, I actually, I was one of the co-heads of our Get Out the Vote campaign, where we brought the Ottawa Centre candidates to campus. We moderated a debate with them. It was live on CTV, CBC, and we had a really good turnout. We had over 300 plus students show up. That was the most we'd ever had for a debate on campus, which usually one happens every time the federal election comes around. And so we're happy with that. I think we're getting positive momentum, especially now since a lot of parties are trying to pivot to our generation, because now our demographic, I believe between the ages of 18 and let's say 35 is, if not the highest, the second highest population percentage in Canada now. So I think in the past you've seen that political parties were not engaging young people because they didn't have faith that they were going to get out to vote. But now in order to win, they need us to get out and vote. What we're seeing is, the Ontario Liberals, for example, have a commitment to run 30 candidates under the age of 30 in the next provincial election. That's just the tip of the iceberg in terms of what's to come in terms of political parties engaging our generation. And I think that's going to help. Seeing people of our generation representing us in government is going to make us feel less disconnected to the system and the process. And I think in the next few years, we're going to see that voter turnout uptick. But I think it's just been people feel disengaged with the system at our age. But I've been happy to see the progress we've made so far with political parties getting engaged on social media, getting young people out, getting them involved in the party and whatnot, right? So, and I'm hoping that positive momentum continues.
In the United States, in this election, there's a dramatic divide between rural America, particularly in the middle of the country, versus suburban America versus urban America. And you've undoubtedly seen the maps where it looks like the two coasts are Democratic and the middle of the country is Republican. We sort of have that problem in Canada as well, and it almost as if it is the party that wins the suburbs can end up winning, because urban goes to Democrat or Liberal or NDP, and rural goes Conservative or Republican. And so therefore it's the suburbs that ends up being the deciding factor. Why do you think that is?
That's always been a fascinating, and I love looking at maps of even what we consider democratic states. But when you zoom in on them and you look at all the counties, only the big cities are bright blue, and like 80% of the vote goes to the Democrats. And then all the rural parts of even the state of New York and the western parts of California that touch on Utah and Arizona, those are Republicans areas still, despite the state being inevitably Democratic on the state level, presidential level, everything. So it's always interesting to look at the wave of red across the congressional map and whatnot, and the counties. But then you just see the specks of blue, and because there's so many people packed into those little spots, that's the vote swings to the Democrats in certain states because of that. I think it would be because from my experience, I'm from Moncton, New Brunswick. Not as much diversity, not as much culture out there. Still a proud New Brunswicker, but coming to Ottawa, being immersed in so much culture that I had no idea existed before, being enlightened on all these different issues that just don't become apparent in a smaller population because there's less people. You get opened up to certain policies. You can start to be able to put yourselves in the shoes of other people and then recognize certain policy issues that you might have not been able to before. And that's why I think rural voters tend to vote Conservative, because it's more money based. It's not about social issues. It's about balancing the budget every year. And they're not too keen to talk about the other issues like systemic racism. And then that's not to say that rural voters are racist. It's just those issues don't become apparent in rural communities as much. But when you go into the bigger cities, those issues are. So that's why they end up being more left leaning, because they're more they hear the social issues more, and they're more cognizant of those issues. And when they see those on the ballot, they tend to vote that way. And the reason why the suburbs end up kind of being the balancing point is because the suburbs are exactly what divides rural Canada from urban Canada. It's where, you look at Brampton, let's just say, a very suburban city that a lot of people go into urban Toronto to work and then come home. But if you drive 30 minutes, further west, you end up in rural Ontario. So, you have a healthy mix of both different types of demographics there. And that's why the suburban voters always end up being that flip vote that will swing an election every year. And we see that in the United States, as the suburbs are starting to lean more and more Democratic, we're seeing that the House of Representatives is already locked down for the Democrats for tomorrow. There's not a poll that says that the Republicans are going to win the House of Representatives, or a reputable poll, I should say. So those battles are going to start taking place in the suburbs more and more, because the two, rural and urban, are becoming so different politically.
We're chatting tonight with Matthew Gagne, who is the president of the Carlton University Academic Students Association. We're going to take a break and come back with some concluding comments in just a minute. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour, Saga 960. We're chatting tonight with Matthew Gagne, who is the president of the Carlton University Academic Student Association. And we've been talking about the challenges of going back to school during COVID-19, and particularly the problem about taking exams and issues with grading, et cetera. But we've also been talking about politics, which is kind of fun with Matthew because he's a political science major at Carleton. Just to wrap up our conversation, Matthew, we've talked about Canadian politics, U.S. politics. We've talked about suburban versus rural. There's this famous line that you've undoubtedly heard. It's been attributed to a bunch of different people, Edmund Burke and Winston Churchill and a lot of other people. But it goes something like, if you're not a liberal at 25, you have no heart. If you're not a conservative at 35, you have no brain. What do you think? Are you going to become a conservative in 5 years, 10 years?
That's an interesting quote. I've definitely heard that before. I think the ages were adjusted, but yeah. I think, what that's referencing is that the more liberal sided voter is younger because they're more open to change. And, the conservative parties, not the Conservative Party, but just in general, conservative parties, around the world are more about remaining status quo, nothing changing too much on social anyway, balancing the budget, very cut and dry topics where, more left-leaning parties are always pushing the envelope on certain issues, which the younger generation is always more open to. So I think that's kind of a demographic thing where it's like, as you get older, you get set in your ways. And, I'm not saying I'll be a conservative at 35 or a liberal at 35, but I mean, it just, as you get older, you get set in your ways. And I mean, props to, I think it's been better, the older generation is starting to be more receptive to our ideas. And it's been awesome to see, even my grandparents evolve on certain issues that I never thought they would.
What are you going to do with your political science degree?
Well, I'm specializing in international relations, so I'd love to be working in global affairs. I had a friend that did their co-op there, and they really thoroughly enjoyed it. They'd like to go back and work there as well. The dream job scenario. I've always said I would love to be working for a NATO in Belgium or the United Nations in Belgium, one of the two, because that's where the two headquarters are. Be right in the middle of global affairs. Especially as the world becomes more and more interconnected, I think the relationships we have with other countries are going to get more and more important than they already are. And I want to, be able to combat some of the isolationist movements we're seeing in many nations right now. And I think the best way to do that would be to join an organization like NATO or the United Nations.
With your last name, I probably shouldn't ask you this question, but how's your French?
Oh, c'est très bien. La famille, mon père est français. My dad's family's all French. My grandmother won't even answer me if I speak English to her.
Très bien. Well, Matthew, it's been a pleasure chatting with you. So you think that Joe Biden's going to win the U.S. election. Lots of people think that we're going to have an election in Canada sometime in the next year. What do you think is going to happen in Canada?
Well, I mean, the Liberals always seem to surprise with something new that is supposed to affect their image, but they always seem to pull through it. So I'm not sure if that'll happen again. I think with the whole We Day thing, they've hit the cap in terms of if they were going to be ousted, now would be the time. But it seems like Canadians are on track to just say, listen, you wanted to work with someone that you knew. We can get that. And at the same time, you're trying to get a lot of work done in a fast period of time. And it's always better to do that with someone that you're familiar with.
Matthew Gagne, head of the Carlton University Academic Student Association. Thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Take care.
That's our show for tonight. Thanks for joining us. It's the Brian Crombie Radio Hour, Saga 960. You can get me every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM or streamed online at www.saga960am.ca, or you can get all my podcasts and video casts after the fact at briancrombie.com. Thanks. Have a good evening.